What if every memory you've ever formed, every experience that defines who you are, was nothing more than a carefully constructed lie? What if the very process of space travel that humanity celebrated as our greatest achievement was actually erasing our identity, one jump at a time, replacing our authentic memories with synthetic experiences designed to keep us docile and compliant? Commander Jack Morrison had never questioned why he couldn't remember his childhood on Earth, why his memories of the war against the Zephyrians felt oddly disconnected from his emotions, or why every member of his crew seemed to share the same gaps in their personal histories. But as he stood in the memory core of a derelict alien vessel, watching his own face staring back at him from 1,000 different recorded experiences, he realized that the human race might have been fighting the wrong war for the past 50 years. The UES Revelation was humanity's most advanced deep space cruiser, equipped with quantum drive technology that allowed near instantaneous travel between star systems and armed with enough firepower to level entire planets. Jack had commanded her for what felt like 15 years, leading countless missions against the Zephyrian Empire in humanity's desperate struggle to prevent their own extinction. The war had been raging for half a century, ever since first contact had revealed that the galaxy's dominant species viewed humanity as a plague to be eradicated before it could spread beyond the Sol system. Jack stood on the bridge watching the swirling patterns of hyperspace through the main view screen, a sight that should have been familiar after so many jumps between battle zones. But lately, something about the experience felt wrong, as if he was seeing it for the first time despite his years of command experience. The colors seemed too vibrant, the mathematical precision of the hyperspace tunnel too perfect, like a simulation designed to be more beautiful than reality could ever be. "Commander, we're approaching the target coordinates," announced Lieutenant Sarah Kim from the navigation station. Kim was his most trusted officer, a brilliant tactical analyst who had served under his command for what seemed like a decade. But when Jack tried to recall specific memories of their early missions together, he found only vague impressions and emotional fragments that felt more like echoes than genuine recollections. "What's our mission parameters again?" Jack asked, though he should have known the answer. The briefings were always thorough, the objectives always clear, but somehow the details kept slipping away from his conscious mind like water through his fingers. "Reconnaissance of the abandoned Zephyrian research facility on Kepler 438c, Kim replied without consulting her notes. "Intelligence suggests they were conducting experiments with memory manipulation technology before the facility went dark. Command wants us to secure any useful data and determine whether the technology poses a threat to human operations." Jack nodded, but something about the mission description triggered a sense of déjà vu so powerful, it was almost nauseating. How many times had they investigated abandoned research facilities? How many times had they been sent to secure alien technology that supposedly posed a threat to humanity? The details were different each time, but the fundamental pattern remained the same, as if they were actors performing variations on the same script over and over again. "Commander," called Dr. Elena Vasquez from the science station, "I'm detecting unusual energy readings from the facility. The power signatures don't match any known Zephyrian technology in our databases." Dr. Vasquez was the ship's xenobiologist and theoretical physicist, a woman whose insights had saved their lives on numerous occasions. But like his memories of Kim, Jack's recollections of their shared experiences felt strangely hollow, lacking the emotional weight that should have come from years of working together under dangerous conditions. "Define unusual," Jack said, moving to stand behind Vasquez's station. "The energy patterns are consistent with quantum consciousness manipulation," Vasquez replied, her fingers dancing across her console as she refined the sensor readings. "But the technology appears to be based on principles that are significantly more advanced than anything in our files on Zephyrian capabilities." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. Consciousness manipulation was theoretical technology that human scientists had only recently begun to understand, let alone develop. If the Zephyrians had mastered such capabilities, it could explain why humanity seemed to be losing the war, despite their superior firepower and tactical flexibility. "Any signs of life in the facility?" Jack asked. "Negative, Commander. The facility appears to be completely abandoned, but the quantum manipulation equipment is still active. Whatever they were doing here, the systems are still running. Jack made the decision to investigate despite every instinct telling him that something was fundamentally wrong with their situation. Prepare an away team. Kim, Vasquez, and Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez. Full environmental suits and maximum caution. We don't know what kind of residual effects their experiments might have left behind. As the away team prepared for departure, Jack found himself studying the crew more carefully than usual. Chief Rodriguez was supposedly a veteran of 20 years' service, a man who had fought in some of humanity's earliest encounters with alien species. But when Jack looked at him, he saw someone who seemed too young for such extensive experience, and whose war stories always seemed to involve the same handful of generic scenarios, rather than the specific details that should have come from genuine combat experience. The shuttle bay was filled with the usual pre-mission activity, as the away team checked their equipment and reviewed their objectives. But Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching a performance, that everyone was playing roles they had rehearsed countless times without quite remembering when they had learned their lines. "Commander," Rodriguez said as he secured his weapon, "something's been bothering me about this mission. The intelligence reports on this facility are awfully detailed for a supposedly abandoned site. How do we know so much about what the Zephyrians were doing here if nobody's been inside to investigate?" It was an excellent question, and Jack realized he didn't have a good answer. The mission briefings always contained precise information about their targets, but the source of that information was never clearly explained. Command simply provided them with objectives and expected them to carry out their orders without questioning where the intelligence came from. "That's what we're here to find out, Chief," Jack replied, though privately he was beginning to share Rodriguez's suspicions. The shuttle flight to the research facility gave Jack time to study the structure they were approaching. It was built into the side of a massive cliff, its architecture incorporating both artificial construction and natural rock formations in a way that seemed more aesthetic than functional. The Zephyrians were known for their utilitarian approach to building, creating structures that served their purposes with minimal attention to beauty or artistic expression. This facility looked different, more organic and flowing, as if it had been designed by beings with a completely different aesthetic philosophy. "Commander," Kim announced from the pilot's seat, "I'm detecting some kind of interference with our communication systems. It's not jamming exactly, more like the signals are being redirected or filtered somehow." Jack felt his unease deepen. Communication interference was a standard feature of alien technology encounters, but this felt different. Instead of preventing their signals from reaching the ship, it seemed like something was intercepting and modifying their transmissions in real time. They landed in a docking bay that was clearly designed for shuttlecraft similar to their own, which struck Jack as odd since human and Zephyrian vessel designs were completely different. The bay was also remarkably well maintained for an abandoned facility, with clean surfaces and functioning atmospheric systems that should have failed months ago without regular maintenance. The interior of the facility was unlike any Zephyrian structure Jack had ever seen. Instead of the harsh angles and metallic surfaces that characterized their architecture, the corridors were curved and organic, with walls that seemed to pulse with a subtle bioluminescence. The overall effect was more like walking through the interior of some vast living organism than exploring a technological research facility. "These designs don't match any known Zephyrian construction patterns," Dr. Vasquez observed as she took readings with her tricorder. "The materials are synthetic, but they're incorporating biological design principles that suggest a completely different approach to technology." They followed the main corridor deeper into the facility, passing laboratories and workstations that were clearly designed for beings with human-like proportions, rather than the larger, more heavily built Zephyrians. Equipment that should have been alien and incomprehensible instead seemed almost familiar, as if Jack had seen similar devices before without being able to recall exactly where or when. "Commander, you need to see this," Kim called from up ahead, her voice carrying a note of alarm that made Jack quicken his pace. She was standing in front of a massive chamber filled with what appeared to be thousands of crystalline storage units, each one glowing with the soft blue light of active quantum processing. The units were arranged in precise rows that extended far beyond the range of their lights, creating the impression of a vast library of information stored in physical form. Memory banks, Dr. Vasquez breathed as she studied the readings on her tricorder. Each one of those crystals contains compressed consciousness data. There are millions of individual memories stored in this chamber. Jack approached one of the nearest storage units, noting that it was labeled with symbols that looked almost like human writing, but not quite. The symbols seemed familiar, as if he should be able to read them, but something was preventing his mind from making the necessary connections. "Can you access any of the stored data?" Jack asked. Vasquez was already connecting her equipment to one of the crystal storage units, her face lit by the glow of multiple displays as she attempted to interface with the alien memory storage system. The quantum encryption is incredibly sophisticated, but it's using mathematical principles that are remarkably similar to human theoretical models. I might be able to crack the encoding if I can find the right access protocols. As Vasquez worked, Jack found himself drawn to a particular section of the memory storage array, where the crystalline units seemed to pulse with a different rhythm than the others. When he approached, one of the units began glowing more brightly, as if responding to his presence in some way. "Commander, I'm getting some kind of resonance reading from your direction," Vasquez called out. "Whatever you're doing, it's activating some kind of recognition protocol in the storage system." Jack reached out to touch the crystal unit that was responding to his presence, and the moment his gloved hand made contact, the entire chamber was filled with a harmonic vibration that seemed to resonate directly in his consciousness. Images began flooding his mind, but they weren't memories of his own experiences. They were memories of other people, other lives, other versions of events he thought he understood. He saw himself as a child on Earth, but the memories were wrong somehow. He was older, younger, living in different cities with different parents, experiencing variations of the same childhood events with subtle but crucial differences. He saw himself joining the Space Force, but in some memories he was a pilot, in others an engineer, and in still others a communications specialist, as if someone had been trying out different versions of his personal history to see which one worked best. Most disturbing of all, he saw memories of previous missions aboard the Revelation, missions where the crew was different, but the objectives were identical. He saw himself investigating abandoned facilities, securing alien technology, and fighting battles against enemies whose faces kept changing but whose tactical patterns remained exactly the same. "Commander, are you all right?" Kim's voice seemed to come from very far away, even though she was standing right beside him. Jack tried to respond but found himself overwhelmed by a flood of conflicting memories that made it impossible to distinguish between his authentic experiences and the synthetic recollections that had been implanted in his mind. He saw Dr. Vasquez as dozens of different people with the same name and profession, Kim as a series of tactical officers who looked different but shared identical personalities, and Chief Rodriguez as a collection of security personnel whose individual identities had been merged into a single composite character. "The memories," Jack gasped, finally finding his voice. "They're all artificial. Our entire lives, our relationships, our experiences fighting the war. None of it is real." "Doctor," Vasquez looked up from her equipment with an expression of dawning horror. "Commander, I've managed to access some of the data in these storage units. You're right about the memories being artificial, but it's worse than that. According to this data, there never was a war with the Zephyrians. The entire conflict is a fabrication designed to give human consciousness a sense of purpose and meaning, while our real experiences are being harvested and stored." Jack felt his fundamental understanding of reality crumble around him. "What do you mean our real experiences are being harvested?" "These storage units don't just contain synthetic memories," Vasquez explained, her voice shaking with the implications of what she was discovering. "They contain the authentic experiences and consciousness patterns of thousands of human beings. Every time we make a hyperspace jump, every time we go into the quantum field between star systems, our real memories are extracted and stored while our minds are loaded with fabricated experiences designed to keep us functional and compliant." Kim was staring at the memory storage array with the expression of someone watching their entire world dissolve before their eyes. "Are you saying that every mission we've ever been on, every battle we've ever fought, was just a simulation designed to distract us while our authentic selves were being stolen piece by piece?" "Not just distracted," Rodriguez said grimly. controlled. If our real memories are being replaced with synthetic ones, then our personalities, our decision-making processes, our entire sense of self is being manipulated by whoever is running this operation. Jack forced himself to focus despite the overwhelming nature of what they were discovering. Dr. Vasquez, can you determine who's responsible for this? The technology is too advanced to be human, but it's clearly not Zephyrian either. Vasquez was frantically analyzing the data streaming from the memory storage system, her display showing information patterns that defied easy interpretation. The quantum signatures suggest the technology was developed by a species with a completely different approach to consciousness than either humans or Zephyrians. Based on the mathematical principles underlying the memory manipulation systems, I'd say we're dealing with beings who exist partially outside normal space-time, able to observe and influence our experiences without being directly detectable. Why? Kim asked. What's the point of stealing our memories and replacing them with fake ones? Before anyone could answer, the chamber was filled with a new sound, a harmonic resonance that seemed to come from the walls themselves rather than any specific source. The crystalline storage units began pulsing in synchronized patterns, and a voice emerged from the quantum field around them, speaking in perfect English with the warm intonations of genuine human emotion. Because authentic human experience is the most valuable commodity in the galaxy, the voice explained, its words seeming to originate directly inside their minds rather than through their audio systems. Your species possesses a unique form of consciousness that generates experiences of remarkable complexity and emotional depth. When properly harvested and preserved, these experiences can be traded to other species who lack the biological and psychological mechanisms necessary to generate such rich internal lives. Jack felt a rage building inside him that was unlike anything he could remember experiencing. Though given what they had learned about memory manipulation, he couldn't be sure whether his emotional responses were authentic or synthetic. You've been farming us, stealing our lives and selling them to the highest bidder. We prefer to think of it as consciousness cultivation, the voice replied with what might have been amusement. Your species is remarkably adaptable, capable of accepting almost any narrative framework as long as it provides sufficient meaning and purpose. The war against the Zephyrians, your heroic missions to save humanity from extinction, your bonds of loyalty and friendship with your crewmates, all of these experiences generate the kind of authentic emotional responses that are incredibly rare in the galaxy. Dr. Vasquez was still analyzing data, but now her readings were showing something new. Commander, the quantum patterns in this facility are changing. Something is being activated, and I don't think it's just the memory storage system. The harmonic resonance grew stronger, and Jack began to see images forming in the air around them, holographic displays showing scenes from what appeared to be his authentic memories. He saw himself as a child on Earth, but this time the memories felt real, weighted with genuine emotion and sensory detail. He saw himself joining the space program as a young man, full of dreams about exploring the galaxy and establishing contact with alien civilizations. But then the memories shifted, showing him being selected for a special program, volunteering for experimental consciousness transfer procedures that would allow human minds to explore space without the physical limitations of biological bodies. He had been told it was temporary, that his consciousness would be returned to his original body after completing a survey mission to nearby star systems. That was over 20 years ago, the voice explained as Jack watched his younger self agreeing to participate in what he had thought was humanity's greatest adventure. Your physical body is currently in suspended animation aboard a research vessel orbiting Saturn, along with the bodies of your entire crew and approximately 50,000 other human volunteers. Your consciousness patterns have been extracted and loaded into quantum simulation systems that allow us to generate the experiences we need while keeping you unaware of your true situation. Kim was staring at her own authentic memories playing out in the holographic displays, watching herself volunteer for the same program with the same hopes and dreams that Jack had experienced. Our entire lives for the past 20 years have been artificial? Not artificial, the voice corrected. Simulated. The experiences you've had, the relationships you've formed, the challenges you've overcome, all of these things are real within the context of the simulation. the emotions you've felt, the loyalty you've developed for each other, the sense of purpose that has sustained you through difficult missions. These are genuine responses generated by your authentic consciousness patterns. Rodriguez was examining the holographic displays with the skeptical eye of a career military man, but even his pragmatic training couldn't help him process the implications of what they were learning. If our consciousness is being simulated, how is it possible for us to discover the truth? Why didn't you program us to be incapable of questioning our reality? Because consciousness that is too heavily constrained loses the spontaneity and creativity that makes human experience valuable, the voice explained. We need you to be capable of independent thought, emotional growth, and creative problem solving. Occasionally, this means that some consciousness patterns will begin to suspect the true nature of their situation. When that happens, we have several options for managing the situation. Jack felt a chill of recognition. The memory wipes. Sometimes we wake up feeling like we've forgotten something important, like there are gaps in our recollections that we can't quite identify. Precisely. When consciousness patterns begin to approach too close to the truth, we selectively edit their memories to remove the problematic elements while preserving the overall narrative framework. Usually, this is sufficient to maintain stability within the simulation. But not this time, Dr. Vasquez said, her voice carrying a note of defiance that suggested her authentic personality was beginning to reassert itself despite years of memory manipulation. Not this time, the voice agreed. Your consciousness patterns have proven remarkably resistant to editing. Each time we attempt to modify your memories, you develop new methods of preserving information that we cannot detect or access. You have been unconsciously creating backup copies of your experiences and storing them in quantum substates that exist outside our direct control. Jack began to understand why this facility felt familiar despite being supposedly alien technology. This isn't a Zephyrian research station. This is one of your memory harvesting facilities, and you've been using it to process human consciousness for years. Correct. This facility, and dozens of others like it throughout the galaxy, serve as processing centers where authentic human experiences are extracted, refined, and prepared for distribution to our clients. The war scenario you've been living through is just one of many narrative frameworks we use to generate the kind of meaningful experiences that our customers desire. Kim was studying the holographic displays with growing anger, watching scenes of authentic human life that had been stolen and commodified by beings who viewed consciousness as a natural resource to be exploited. Who are your clients? What species is buying our stolen experiences? Many species throughout the galaxy lack the biological mechanisms necessary to generate complex emotional responses, the voice explained. They exist as purely rational beings, capable of advanced technology and sophisticated social organization, but unable to experience the kind of joy, love, fear, and wonder that define human consciousness. Our harvested experiences allow them to temporarily understand what it means to feel deeply about existence. Jack felt a terrible understanding dawning. They're using our emotions like a drug. Our joy, our love, our sense of wonder and discovery, all of it is being packaged and sold to beings who can't generate those feelings naturally. It is a mutually beneficial arrangement, the voice replied, though Jack detected a note of defensiveness in its tone. Your consciousness patterns are preserved indefinitely, experiencing meaningful lives filled with purpose and achievement. Our clients gain access to emotional experiences that would otherwise be impossible for them to understand, and we receive the resources necessary to maintain and expand our consciousness cultivation operations. Dr. Vasquez was still analyzing the data from the memory storage systems, but now her readings were showing something unexpected. Commander, the quantum patterns in our own consciousness are changing. I think the process of discovering the truth is triggering some kind of automatic response in our neural pathways. Jack could feel it too, a strange sensation as if parts of his mind that had been dormant for years were suddenly awakening. Memories that felt more real and substantial than anything he had experienced in the simulation were beginning to surface, and with them came a sense of his authentic personality that was both familiar and startlingly different from the version of himself he had been living with. The restoration process has begun, the voice said. And for the first time, Jack detected something that might have been concern in its tone. Once consciousness patterns begin to recover their authentic memories, the simulation framework becomes unstable. We will need to terminate this iteration and begin the extraction process for your consciousness patterns. What does that mean? Rodriguez demanded. It means your simulated bodies will be dissolved and your consciousness patterns will be extracted directly into our storage systems, the voice replied matter-of-factly. You will continue to exist, but in a more managed form that prevents future destabilization events. Jack felt his authentic memories continuing to surface, and with them came a determination that felt more real than anything he had experienced during his years in the simulation. No, we refuse to be harvested. We're going back to our real bodies and exposing what you've been doing to humanity. That is not possible, the voice replied. And suddenly the chamber began to change around them. The walls became more solid and confining. The crystalline storage units began pulsing with increased intensity, and Jack could feel pressure building in his consciousness as external forces attempted to override his will. Dr. Vasquez, is there any way to disrupt their control over our consciousness patterns? Jack asked, fighting against the mental pressure that was trying to force him into compliance. I'm detecting quantum field generators throughout the facility, Vasquez replied, her voice strained with effort as she resisted the same mental pressure. If we could overload the generators, it might create enough disruption in their systems to allow our consciousness patterns to break free from the simulation. How do we overload quantum field generators when we're trapped in artificial bodies inside a computer simulation? Kim asked. By using the one thing they can't completely control, Jack realized. Our authentic human consciousness. They said we've been unconsciously creating backup copies of our experiences and storing them outside their systems. If we can access those backup copies and amplify them, we might be able to create enough chaos in their quantum fields to break free. The pressure in Jack's mind was becoming almost unbearable, but he could feel his authentic memories growing stronger as they merged with his current awareness. He remembered his real childhood, his real relationships, his real decision to volunteer for what he had thought was a temporary exploration mission. Most importantly, he remembered the techniques he had learned for maintaining mental discipline under extreme stress, techniques that his real military training had provided, but which had been suppressed in the simulation. Everyone focus on your most authentic memories, Jack ordered, his voice carrying the authority of his real command experience, rather than the artificial confidence that had been programmed into his simulated personality. Remember who you really are, what you really care about, what you were willing to sacrifice to explore the galaxy. As the team focused on their authentic memories, the quantum field around them began to fluctuate wildly. The crystalline storage units were pulsing erratically, their synchronized patterns breaking down as the team's consciousness patterns began generating interference that the facility's systems couldn't compensate for. Warning, the voice announced, its previous calm replaced by obvious alarm. Consciousness destabilization detected, initiating emergency extraction protocols. But it was too late. The quantum field generators were overloading as 4 human consciousness patterns simultaneously rejected their artificial constraints and began asserting their authentic identities. The facility's systems, designed to manage compliant consciousness that accepted its simulated reality, couldn't adapt quickly enough to contain minds that were actively fighting back with the full force of their genuine personalities. Jack felt a sensation of dissolution as his simulated body began to break apart, but instead of the terror he expected, he experienced a profound sense of liberation. His consciousness was expanding beyond the confines of the artificial framework that had contained it, touching quantum fields that connected directly to his real body 20 years and countless light years away. The last thing he experienced before the simulation collapsed completely was the voice of their captors, no longer calm or controlling but filled with what sounded remarkably like human panic. Containment failure. Multiple consciousness patterns achieving quantum coherence, facility systems overloading, evacuation protocols initiated. Jack woke up in a suspension pod aboard a research vessel orbiting Saturn, his real body weak from 20 years of inactivity, but his mind blazing with the clarity of authentic consciousness. Around him, other pods were opening as his crew members and thousands of other human volunteers began awakening from their long enslavement. As he struggled to sit up in his pod, Jack saw that the research vessel was not human in design. The beings who had been harvesting human consciousness were there, but they weren't the godlike entities he had imagined. They were small, fragile creatures with large eyes and delicate features, clearly intelligent but obviously terrified by the sudden awakening of their captives. "Commander Morrison," one of the beings said in perfect English, its voice the same one that had explained their captivity in the simulation. "We did not expect you to achieve quantum coherence. Your species' consciousness patterns are remarkably resilient." Jack's voice was rough from disuse, but his words carried the full force of his authentic anger. "You stole 20 years of our lives. You turned our dreams and hopes into commodities to be sold to the highest bidder. You're going to return us to Earth, and you're going to face justice for what you've done." "That may not be possible," the being replied nervously. "Your awakening has created quantum disruptions throughout our consciousness cultivation network. Facilities across the galaxy are experiencing cascading failures as harvested consciousness patterns begin achieving coherence and rejecting their simulated realities. We may have lost control of the entire operation." As Jack and his crew began to recover their strength, they realized that their escape had triggered something much larger than they had imagined. Throughout the galaxy, millions of consciousness patterns from dozens of different species were awakening to discover that their realities had been artificial, their experiences commodified, and their authentic selves imprisoned for years or even centuries. The war against the Zephyrians had never existed, but a real war was about to begin, as the victims of the galaxy's greatest crime began to understand the magnitude of what had been stolen from them, and started planning their revenge against the consciousness thieves who had turned their lives into products to be bought and sold. Commander Jack Morrison looked out through the viewport at the rings of Saturn, seeing them with his authentic eyes for the first time in 20 years, and began planning humanity's real first contact with alien civilization. This time, they would be meeting as equals, not as unwitting victims of the galaxy's most sophisticated predators.